Australia's government wants people to know its actions are as tough as its words. Asylum seekers who arrive by boat will be quickly deported, never settled in Australia. Overnight, these Afghans, Pakistanis and Iranians were among the first 40 to be flown from the Australian territory of Christmas Island to remote Manus Island in Papua New Guinea. The government blurs this footage, they say, to avoid prejudicing refugee applications or endangering the families back home. But blurring faces also dehumanises. In the run-up to an election in Australia, politicians are presenting asylum seekers arriving by boat as a threat to be repelled. They will decide which refugees come to Australia, they say, not people smugglers.
If you are a people smuggler and you put a person onto a boat to come to Australia, that person will not be allowed to settle in Australia. That's our message.
The tough talk, though, doesn't seem to have put off asylum seekers yet. More than 1,500 have come into Australian waters aboard 19 different boats since the Prime Minister's hardline policy was announced in mid-July.
I think what we'll see is probably, some changes in terms of the numbers of people from different countries of origin, and those who perceive themselves as being in the most desperate circumstances continuing to come, and perhaps in the case of people from Afghanistan coming in even increasing numbers.
There are also doubts a developing country like Papua New Guinea will be able to resettle thousands of refugees.
Activists in Los Angeles are fasting to let the world know that inhumane treatment should not be allowed in U.S. prisons. This Hunger for Justice movement is in solidarity with the California inmates who have been on a hunger strike since July 8th. Inmates are demanding an end to solitary confinement and an end to group punishment.
How can it be that we live in this country with thousands of people, prisoners, on hunger strike?
Margaret Prescott is with Global Women's Strike. Prescott says California officials are endorsing torture by refusing to end the use of indefinite solitary confinement.
Every life is of value, and the data out there shows the physical as well as the emotional and mental impacts of solitary confinement. In California, you've got prisons in solitary confinement for decades.
The action comes after the death of Billy Sell, an inmate being held in solitary confinement at Corcoran State Prison. Prison officials are investigating Sell's death as a suicide, but inmate advocates are calling for an independent review. As the strike approaches its fourth week, inmate relatives are becoming more concerned.
They're put in these cells without any physical contact. I haven't been able to hug or touch my son in over 4 years. And when I look at the others that have been in there for 20 and 30 years, it doesn't make me feel any hope.
Family members say their only hope is coming from the growing support of the people. They say more and more people are learning the truth about California's jails. And now state officials are being flooded with calls and petitions demanding an end to indefinite isolation.
They are peacefully asking for compassion, and we are peacefully, as their spokespeople, as their family members, asking for the same thing and asking for that same compassion.
Amnesty International has called the condition of California's prisons an affront to human rights. The global human rights group is also demanding an impartial probe into the death of Billy Sell.
To mark the anniversary, China has been putting its military on parade, having more to show off this year than ever before.
I want to say our country loves peace, but we are not afraid of war. If our interests are infringed as a PLA soldier, my duty is to follow orders.
60 years after the end of the Korean War, which first showed to the West what the Chinese army was capable of, it is far more technologically advanced. Witness to that transformation are Korean War veterans like General Xu Guangyu.
China's military hardware has improved a lot, but compared to the Americans and other Western countries, China is still 10 years behind, or even 20.
Closing that gap, and closing it quickly, many in China see as only fair and done in the name of peace. Despite the rapid increases which have seen China's military spending top $100 billion annually, not included, say analysts, is expensive research and development, which is helping close the technology gap with the US military.
There is a very close synergy between the civilian and the military sector in terms of research and development, including that of new weapons as well as space technology and so forth. So what we are seeing actually is an army which has the ambition of closing the gap with the US within, say, 20 years.
And despite the global recession now hurting China, the country seems to have increasingly deep pockets to match that ambition.
Almost 26.5 million people are now unemployed in the European Union, of whom 19.2 million are those living in countries using the euro. That latest data from the EU statistical agency Eurostat also outlines that 1 million more adults are now jobless in the EU compared to the same period last year. Many experts say that the EU unemployment rate will rise during the next 12 months because it takes time for any potential economic growth to have a positive impact.
Unemployment picks up a few months after economic activity. So economic activity has not yet picked up. Maybe it will do so in the second part of the year, maybe at the end of this year, and then maybe we will see the same thing for unemployment 10-12 months later.
Separate figures just out from Eurostat also show that nervous business operators are not investing in their enterprises. The European Commission has announced a new €22 billion innovation and investment programme to try and stimulate the economy.
We need to bolster both public and private spending if we're to stay in, never mind ahead of the game. To put it more bluntly, without new ideas, Europe is not going to get out of this crisis quickly, if at all. Without new ideas, our businesses lose their competitive edge and investors will look elsewhere.
In those EU countries that were bailed out after going bankrupt, some 50% of their young adults are unemployed.
The ultimate goal of all our endeavours of the last 3 years is precisely employment. Financial stability, fiscal consolidation, competitiveness, structural reforms are intermediate goals or means to an end. The real objective is to get people back at work.
Now some kind of a fear psychosis in government not to approve projects for fear of getting hauled up and therefore they don't want to take risks.
Investments made in these projects are stuck. Money is not paying back. This could lead to piling up of bad debts. The vicious cycle has set in. Doing business in the country remains as difficult as ever. Now, without high growth prospects, the businessmen see no incentive to invest.
As in other sectors, as in the case of other policies in India, I think the bugbear has been implementation. And I think we continue to suffer from implementation issues in the economy, in sectors, in policies.
In the last 2 months, the rupee has depreciated sharply. This has further hit the sentiments hard. To stabilize the currency, money supply is to be controlled. This makes the new investments even more difficult to come by.
Israeli agents continue to blackmail Gazan patients into working as spies at the Israeli-controlled Erez crossing in northern Gaza. In July alone, 4 Palestinians were detained at the crossing despite receiving exit permits from Israeli authorities. The latest victim of Israeli spy network is 28-year-old Hossam Zaanin from the town of Beth Hanun, in the northernmost tip of the coastal strip. He was arrested on the 23rd of July.
My son received a permit to leave Gaza through the Erez crossing with his mother. Later that day, we received a call from an Israeli intelligence officer telling us that my son was arrested. My wife returned home later in the evening without her son. My son refused to cooperate with them, and that is why he got arrested despite of his illness.
Israeli inhumane practices not only hurt the patients, but they also traumatize their families. The wives and children of victims are the most affected.
My daughters keep crying and asking for their father. It is heartbreaking for me to be without my husband, and I don't know when he's coming back. The Israelis gave him a permit to leave Gaza, and then they arrested him. How low can they sink arresting a patient seeking treatment?
According to the Al Mizan Center for Human Rights,
Many Gazan patients are blackmailed to work as Israeli spies in order to obtain exit permits through the Israeli crossing.
Israeli agents at the air crossing use the exit permits as a method to pressure chronic patients into working for them. Patients are forced to choose either to collaborate with Israel or die in Gaza. Under the First Geneva Convention and several international humanitarian laws, these Israeli practices are illegal and violate the right to freedom of movement. Israel, as an occupying power, is also obliged under international law to provide health services to populations under its occupation.
Shia Muslims across the globe are commemorating the martyrdom anniversary of Imam Reza, the 8th Shia Imam and successor to Prophet Muhammad. In Iran, especially in the holy city of Mashhad, millions of mourners have gathered at the holy shrine of Imam Reza to mark this sad day in history, reciting elegies in groups and giving out to charity or free food to the mourners.
Those who killed Imam Reza were ignorant. They were too ignorant to know his true value and position in Islam and history.
Imam Reza was martyred for his courage and free spirit. He was killed for defending the true principles of Islam, but he also showed us how to resist tyrant regimes.
Back in 818 AD, the Abbasid ruler Ma'mun forcibly brought Imam Reza to the northeastern Iranian province of Khorasan from the city of Medina in Saudi Arabia. 2 years later, the rightful successor to Prophet Muhammad was imprisoned, poisoned and murdered by Ma'mun. He was buried in this place called Mashhad al-Reza, or the place of martyrdom of Imam Reza. Imam Reza is the only Shia Imam reposing in Iran.
All Shia Imams were perfect role models for us. Whatever we've now, such as wisdom, love and faith, is all because of them.
God has said in His holy book that there will always be Imams throughout ages. Prophet Muhammad will always have a successor. We are waiting for a day in which his 12th successor Imam Mahdi returns and brings justice to the world.
Imam Reza directed Muslims to the right path and removed deviated views of those who tried to distort Islam. This way, the holy Imam protected and propagated the principles of Islam during his lifetime, until the vicious ruler of the time decided to eliminate him. His holy shrine is now one of the most extensively visited pilgrimage centers in the world.
The coalition government's programme of benefit cuts have hit the most vulnerable in society, including the elderly and disabled the hardest, all while the richest have received tax breaks and bailouts. Measures like the bedroom tax, which cuts housing benefit to those households deemed to have too many bedrooms, have been particularly controversial. But a High Court challenge by a group of 10 families against the cuts, which came into effect in April, was thrown out by the judge.
Disabled people felt that it was discriminatory against people with disabilities for having to pay for the extra rooms that they needed for reasons for storing extra equipment or for having people come over and stay with them to look after them for all manner of reasons. And it was felt by the disabled community that this was unfair and targeted them unfairly.
The economic crisis of 2008 and subsequent bailout of failing banks contributed to the budget deficit. It led to the government making cuts to higher education, tax credits and housing benefit. A government report conceded that of the 660,000 housing benefit claimants affected by the cuts, 420,000 were disabled, a shocking 63% of the total. The campaigners say it isn't a coincidence that the government has been targeting the most vulnerable, and what amounts to a war on the disabled is having devastating consequences.
We've seen disability hate crime explode as a result. We've seen suicides within the disabled community. Over the past 2 years, hit 11,500 people have committed suicide because of the welfare cuts, after being targeted by the work capability assessment. Within 6 weeks of being seen and being told you are fit to work, they've died, and people have committed suicide. It's phenomenal what they're doing.
Part of the government's drive has been to get disabled people off benefits and into work by determining them fit to work. They contracted the private company Atos to undertake tests, provoking outrage as the company ruled terminally ill people should be in work and off benefits.
The American people expect and deserve honest answers.
Armed with evidence and arguments, U.S. national security officials asked Congress to let them keep collecting millions of Americans' phone and email records, all in the name of preventing a terror attack.
We're not collecting all their phone records so that we can wander through them, and it's only the phone records are being done to look at the connections.
But there was skepticism and hostility from both Democrats and Republicans.
Section 215 of the USA Patriot Act has for years been secretly interpreted to authorize the collection of Americans' phone records on an unprecedented scale.
How can you justify the assertion that phone records of millions of Americans who have nothing to do with terrorism are relevant to an authorized investigation under Section 215?
To bolster the official's testimony, the Obama administration declassified a secret court order to prove that the collection programs are legal. That's contrary to what most Americans believe, that intelligence agencies cannot gather any information about people inside the country without a specific warrant for a specific suspect. However, the declassified court order allows the NSA to collect the phone numbers and email addresses of all people inside the U.S. to see what they are saying to foreign terrorist suspects. The intelligence community says this strengthens its early warning system to detect possible suspects and to uncover plots. The NSA says in 2012, fewer than 500 phone numbers merited a follow-up investigation. At a hackers convention in Las Vegas, the head of the NSA said the program saved lives, and he called the media reports about them tantamount to treason.
If we tell everybody exactly what we're doing, then the adversaries will know how to get through our defenses.